Everybody, welcome to another episode of Conversations with Tom. I am here with somebody who I am so obsessed with. I know I say this every time, but hopefully in my consistency, people will see just how true that is. Ryan Holiday, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks so much. It's always awesome to talk. I feel like this is the only time that we end up talking.
Yeah, it's kind of sad, like especially now in this world where everybody's getting isolated. I am deeply distressed that we're not actually sharing space while we record this, as this has always been a great excuse. This is, I think, the fourth time? Like you've been
Might
on.
be fourth. Yeah, I don't remember.
So it is, it's always been a great excuse for us to come together and actually be in a space. So very sad that this one is virtual, but super excited to get into some of the cool things that you've been working on with your new book, Lives of the Stoics. And I want to immediately put it into context of what's going on right now. So I've been shaken by what I'll round to the sort of culture wars, which I never ever thought that I would think about or spend any time. I'm like, there are people smarter than I that should be engaged. And then I started to feel like a coward, because part of why I was remaining silent as I saw the sort of what I will call a madness reaching a crescendo was I was doing it for business reasons. I thought I'll just keep my head down and keep doing my thing. And I thought, fuck, if I come out and start telling people sort of where I'm at and what I'm thinking through, it could be bad for business. And so that propelled me to start talking about it, because I didn't like the way that it made me feel like a coward. And as I was reading Lives of the Stoics, it seemed to have immediate implications. How do you think the Stoics would interpret this, or even you, having sort of become a Stoic, if I may, interpret all this?
I'm really glad you said that, because it's something I struggle with too. Like on the one hand, as someone who makes work, you're trying to make work for as many people as possible. Not just like for financial reasons, but the whole point of having something to say is that you want people to hear it. And then so there's this kind of tension between, well, if I talk about these safe things, I'll reach as many people as possible. And then over here, there's like this unpleasant issue. And then over here, there's perhaps this, politically divisive issue. And if I touch either one, I'm going to either turn people off or I'm going to get a bunch of nasty emails about it. And so there's this sort of dilemma. I think we fantasize that it would be wonderful to kind of be above it all. Like, oh, I'm just this kind of personality. I'm just kind of, I just focus on this. Like for me, I'd be like, oh, I just talk about ancient philosophy. Therefore, like, it's not relevant to what's happening right now. And I think what I've taken from the Stoics, like I think my early writing about the Stoics, I was primarily looking at these things the way you do, which is like, how does it make you better? How does it make you more resilient? How does it make you smarter, better, stronger, faster? And I think the more you study the true greats, you realize that they weren't just trying to get six-pack abs or to make a few $1 million. Like the whole point was to have as much to go to the point of your show, to have as much impact as possible. And by impact, they weren't just thinking about sort of external, superficial success, but like really making a difference in the world. And so as I've gone deeper and deeper into Stoicism, you realize like, oh, these people were deeply politically and culturally engaged. And I got an email from someone yesterday. They were like, how dare you talk about politics? Like, and they said, what would Seneca, what would Marcus Aurelius think about what you were saying? And look, I hadn't even said anything sort of super political, but I said, I got a little upset and I responded. I was like, what would Seneca the senator, Cato the senator, Marcus Aurelius the emperor, Rutilius Rufus the governor, Junius Rusticus the mayor, Diogenes and Antipater the diplomats, like what would they think about me making a political statement? I mean, they would be totally fine with it. And I think this is the other part that we're losing culturally. Even if they disagreed with my political statement, they wouldn't get butthurt about it, because they understand that people have differing opinions, and it's in the discussion about these things that progress is made. So I'm struggling with that myself, and I think where I've gotten with it is like, I'm going to say what I think and feel, and if people don't like it, that's not my problem. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna, you know, I the response that I got the other night was from someone who responds. I send out this email every month where I recommend books, and they said, "Why is your opinion in this?" And I said, "This entire email is my opinion. That is literally what it is based on. I'm not going to keep my opinion out of it because you are too sensitive to hear that opinion."
Yeah, that is a question I find very bizarre. So if you were a journalist and your job was to sort of present facts to let people know what was going on, I could understand, although journalism obviously has morphed into something different, and I won't even make a
Sure.
judgment on whether it's good or bad. It just seems to have become very different than maybe where it was 20 or 30 years ago. And the like doing a show like this, what the value that I get out of watching shows like this is that people are helping me think through a problem. And
Right.
if they aren't presenting how they're processing it, then it becomes harder for me to make sense of my own world. And so, the Weinstein brothers, yes, the Weinstein brothers, will talk a lot about the sense-making apparatus. And,
Yes.
podcasts have largely become a part of that. And it's like, look, I'm going to walk you through how I'm thinking through it. There are people way smarter than me. And by all means, if you resonate with where they're at and how they're going through it, then seek them out. My thing is, for a certain type of person that thinks in a certain way, I might, by showing how I process something, might be able to add some benefit. And also, there's this quote I heard, and I forget who said it, but I speak not so that I can be understood, but so that I can understand. And a lot of the dialogue is just me trying to figure out, what the fuck do I actually think? Like, this shit is crazy. But
Sure.
in reading your most recent book, one of the notes that I took was that your reading on Stoicism, which I resonate with very, very much, and it's what you just went through, but said maybe slightly different, is that Stoicism is essentially a philosophy of action and not a philosophy of talk. And
Yes.
to me, it's like when I get on that vein, like I want to jump, grab things, bite them, scream, yell, so that people understand. Like, to me, it's that utility. Utility is what matters. And getting people thinking about the world in a way solely to inform how you act. Like, the only thing I care about is your behaviors, the things you
Sure.
actually do. And so when I think about people sort of pontificating in a realm of above the realities of the world, theoretical notions, it's not very interesting. Like, I want to know, what does this look like down in the mud?
Well, so two things pop up to me. So one, in the ancient world, and this is something I talk about a little bit in the book, the sort of the two rival schools were the Epicureans and the Stoics. And in truth, despite what the word Stoic means and Epicurean means, that's not what the philosophies were about. In fact, the philosophies were very, very similar. But the sort of core methodology of the Epicureans was they retreated to what was known as the garden. That was this sort of beautiful compound that Epicurus had, and they kind of focused on their own internal self-development. They went, it's like they left it, almost like a monk going into a monastery. They went there, they looked inward, they improved themselves, and they said, the world is broken, the world is dysfunctional, people suck. I'm not going to get involved in that. And the Stoics said, we agree with all that, but we feel obligated to contribute, to play a role, to make a difference. And so, like, Seneca, sort of surmising the difference between the schools, says, Epicurus says, if you can, like, he basically says, unless it's an emergency, don't get involved in politics. And he's saying, Zeno says, unless there's an emergency exemption, you have to be involved in politics. And so I don't think that just means, like, you should be watching Fox News or MSNBC and following these meaningless squabbles over these tiny policy issues. But the idea that democracy is this thing that just happens and you just live in it is ridiculous. Like, it's a thing that requires participation from everyone, not just voting, but to say, like, hey, like, citizens are complicit in what their governments do because the government's power is derived from the people's consent. And so if you see this happening outside your door, you see this happening on social media, and you decide, well, I'm not going to get involved, that's not me. I think you're falling down on the job. You're not doing your duty. And I think the other thing I struggle with, and I'd be curious your thoughts. I'm on sort of like a text thread with some authors I know, and one of them was saying, like, hey, what, and I won't say what party he was talking about, but he said, hey, what causes are you donating to this year as part of the election? And I sort of replied, and these are all good guys, so I'm not like throwing them under the bus or anything, but I said, like, guys, like, the last election was not actually decided by money. Actually, the candidate that won raised less money than the candidate that lost. So, but what did happen is a lot of people had opinions that they didn't talk about because they thought either the result was a foregone conclusion, or they thought it wasn't their place, or they didn't want to be attacked by trolls or whatever it was. I was like, all of you guys have enormous platforms, and yet I've seen you say nothing about any of these issues. Like, the place for people who are thought leaders or contributors or sense makers, as you said, is to help people walk through that process. And that's been an interesting thing I've experienced. It's like, people follow me because I'm good at breaking down history, because I understand life and people and all this stuff. And then the second I say anything about, somebody's character who holds an elected office, suddenly I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. It's like, literally, this is what I do. This is like, I am a world class. I'm not saying you should just absorb my opinions because they're my opinions, but like, I'm pretty good at sizing these things up and seeing where they go. And suddenly, because it now challenges the identity that you picked up from your parents and their political party, I'm a socialist or something. It's ridiculous.
That's one of the things I think is most important to look at. And when I think about identity politics, what freaks me out is how enticing it is to be on a team. Because once you're on a team, as long as you're spouting the party line, your team is always going to have your back. The problem is when you do that, it's the same fear that I have around just dogma in general, that you're no longer open to new information. And this is all predicated on a belief I have that your current belief set, your current skill set has already taken you as far as it's going to take you. And that to advance, you must advance. You must actually improve. You must learn something new, have a breakthrough, gain a new skill, something that's going to allow you to go farther than where you already are. And so if you allow this stuff to crystallize into, we think this way, they think this way. And that's the very thing that puts us in a camp. So unless I want to lose my belonging, which of course we all have this very intense desire to belong, unless I want to lose my belonging, I just have to take the good with the bad, right? And right. That's where I get scared, is like, now we're going to pathologize. Now we're going to really break. And once you're no longer listening, once you're no longer trying to go, oh, where am I wrong? I know I'm wrong somewhere. So where am I wrong? And when you have both camps saying, where am I wrong? And trying to find a better, more utilitarian, something that's useful approach to life, then it starts to get really weird when they don't have that. So as you look at what's going on now, how do you think about that? Like, do you think it's a problem that people are adopting identity politics for the reasons I just laid out? Yeah. And if so, like, what's the way out?
Yeah, I think Paul Graham talks about the more identities you have, the more stupid you are. Like, if you say, like, I am blank, you've now handed over a set of beliefs to this, like, institution or party or group of people, instead of asking yourself what you think about each thing, right? And, the people that I admire have, a bunch of independent beliefs about different things. And, maybe they're liberal on some issues and conservatives on other issues. And sometimes they vote for this party and sometimes they vote for that party. Like, and the weird thing about where we are right now politically is that, like, I think so much of the issues we're having are not even political, right? Like, I'm going to say that the dangerous name, it's probably going to piss people off. I'm not opposed to Donald Trump because he's a Republican. I'm opposed to Donald Trump because he's a fucking moron and a bad person. Do you know what I mean? And I think that can be said zooming way out, if he was a character in a Shakespeare play, he would be the villain. If he was like, I live on a dirt road in Texas, just as an example, and we can get off politics anytime you want. So cut me off if you think this is not where you want to go. But I live on a dirt road, and all the neighbors have to chip in and work on this dirt road, right? And now I've been fortunate enough. I've advised people in Washington. I've been to Washington. I've talked to business people that know Donald Trump. Everything I know about Donald Trump says, like, and I got this great neighbor who does most of the work on the road, and I watched him put up this big Donald Trump flag the other day. I was like, dude, you tirelessly work on this road. It's not your responsibility. No one pays you to do it. You're being a good neighbor, a good person. You are solving a collective action problem. Donald Trump is the kind of person that doesn't pay his bills, that stiffs contractors, that always asks what's in it for me, so on and so forth. If he lived on this road, he would be the one doing the most damage to the road and helping out everyone else the least amount, right? And by the way, probably complaining about it the most. And so my point is, it's not a political issue. It's an issue fundamentally of character. And I think you can look at all these other things, whether it's looting in the streets or whether it's police brutality or whether it's, income inequality. These are not really political issues. These are, do you feel obligated to help other human beings, right? Does it hurt you inside when you see other people are hurting? Now, there's lots of different ways to solve that, but the point is, I think where we're really struggling, not just in America, but in the world, is agreeing that other people matter and that we should care about those people. Like the mask thing to me is such a great example of this. Like, or let's even do that. College kids partying on campus right now. It's fun. What that fundamentally at the root of that is an inability to understand how your actions affect other people. And I think we're really struggling with that as a society. And the human species have always struggled with this. But what philosophy is there for, what the four virtues of Stoicism, for example, are there for, is to help walk you through why you can't give in to those impulses and why you have to create a framework that lays out your sort of duties and obligations and ethics as a human being. Otherwise, the whole thing falls apart, And I think we're looking at a system right now that's falling apart because people fundamentally don't understand how, their actions impact other people. And that's where we are. You know what I mean?
I do. It's interesting as you were talking, to the thing that as I've gone into this and really looked at it, how the fuck did we end up here? Like I had no sense. And this is just like when Lisa got sick with a microbiome issue. I didn't even know what the microbiome was. And then one day the microbiome changed her life for sure. And so as I look at this and I start thinking about, like what's going on and what exactly happened. And I start doing my own research and looking into, what is this sort of frame of reference from which people are coming at this? I began to realize that we've hit some sort of threshold event. And just like with Lisa's microbiome, where it was like all of a sudden there was this radical change in her life and then by proxy, my own life. And I realized, wait a second, the microbiome exists and she had been having problem, but none of it spilled over into it actually being something she could notice. And then all of a sudden it hits a tipping point, a threshold moment, and boom, it explodes everywhere. And that's what has happened to me. So now I'm having that same moment of where I'm going, what is the corollary of the microbiome in this moment? What is it about the way that people are thinking? Because what I see is, okay, you've got identity politics, getting on a team. Okay, that seems like it's going to lead to competing versus cooperating. That seems like an inherent problem. And then looking at what the actual teams are. So one, we've lost this idea of that the magic is in the friction between the two sides. And when people hear me talk about this, one of the complaints I get is that, I'm saying that humans fall into a binary camp. I'm not saying that. I think so let me define where the friction is. The friction is between people who their primary virtue is what you just laid out, which is compassion, worrying about other people. Then on the other side, and this is just from an evolutionary standpoint. Then on the other side, you have people that say, don't take advantage of me. Okay. So you've got these two camps. And when you look at it from through an evolutionary lens, you realize you need both. You
Of
don't
course.
want to leave the members of your tribe dying on the fucking streets. And at the same time, that if you just give, make sure everybody's safe, you get the person who's parasitic. And then just like game theory tells you that the parasitic nature will bloom until there's a punishment against it. And
You need
so
an equilibrium. I think what you're talking about is equilibrium. And so of the four Stoic virtues are courage, justice, wisdom, but the key virtue in the ancient world is moderation, right? And Aristotle talks about this idea
moderation
of
is one of the four virtues.
yeah, moderation, self-discipline. It's sort of temperance is the other rendering. But Aristotle says that all virtues are a midpoint between two vices, right? And I think that's an important way to think about the friction you're talking about. So he's like, you have fear on one hand or cowardice, and then you have recklessness. In the middle is courage, right? It's good to be generous, but if you're it's not good to be greedy, but if you're overly generous, you'll give everything away. So actually generosity is somewhere sort of right in the middle, right? And I think one of the things I think we're losing, and I'm actually encouraged, again, I don't agree with a lot of his politics, but I think it says something about where we are politically that Joe Biden is painted as a radical leftist by the right. And then by the left, he's despised for being a moderate, right? Like moderation is a good thing, right? Like it's good. He's not radical on either side. And that's actually what you need, especially in the American system. And moderates, I mean, the moderates of a Mitt Romney is just as important as the moderation of a Joe Biden. You need someone who understands that the entire American system is predicated on the fact that almost never will one side get a majority or let alone a supermajority that you need to pass legislation. And so what is required is coalitions and compromises, right? And so the problem is when one side starts to be very immoderate, the other side has to be more immoderate too, because they don't want to compromise. You know what I mean? It's getting further and further and further. And then the middle suddenly looks more and more radical, right? And I think we have this, to me, moderation is a key virtue of life. You don't need to be, you don't need to have the most out of everyone. You just need to have enough for you, right? And so I think we're losing just that political virtue of moderation, which is like, I'm pretty sure I know what the right solution is, but I'm not going to be so conceited or egotistical to think that I know everything and that I need to dominate the other side. Like we're entering a political system where one side thinks they need to own the other side and
gotta dunk on these bitches, man.
Dunking is the worst political trend you can imagine. It's like, I think, even like how we've come to see the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is supposed to be an impartial body of legal experts who, consult the Constitution and help us solve our most vexing legal questions. The idea isn't you win enough elections, you stack the judiciary, then you ram legislation through, and then because you've bought the referees, the other side is screwed when a case comes before the Supreme Court. So even you see this now, the sides go, are justices. And it's like, no, the justices belong to everyone. And so, it's a weird system where we've lost that moderating impulse of like, well, I'm going to take the best of this one and the best of this one. I'm going to come together with a solution that kind of pleases everyone. And then we're going to make progress from there.
Yeah. So bringing it to something you articulated incredibly well in Lives of the Stoics, you talk about this notion of preferred indifference.
Yeah.
And that to me was very compelling, and that they got into this argument of, and I love this quote, and I think this quote is fucking profound, which is, nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And forgive me, I forget some of the guys' names, but there was one guy who was like, no, nothing is good or bad, truly. Like, don't even waste time thinking about it, like, and your life will be happier for it, whether you are sick, whether you're healthy, you're just indifferent to it all. And it becomes this sort of breaking point, and you have this huge falling out in the Stoic camp over like this idea of, look, there are some things we just fucking prefer, like being healthy. Sure, there are moments where being healthy could get you sent off to war, and so it would have been better to be sick in that moment because then you don't end up dying in war. Right. Yes, but Jesus, like on balance, we all prefer to be healthy. And that notion of like can we just fucking decide what we actually want? Because my thing is this, I'm not left or right. I am goal oriented. So
Yes.
what the fuck is our goal? Like the moment we agree on what our goal is, now everybody's idea is just a test. I'm running an experiment. And does this left experiment work? Does the right experiment? Did it fucking move us closer? Yes or no? And if it doesn't, I don't give a shit whose team it was, whose idea it was. I have a goal which I can fucking articulate. And we're now in a place where I feel like we can't even, not only can we not agree on the goal, nobody's even attempting to articulate the goal.
I think that's right. And that concept of preferred indifference to me, it encapsulates a really great problem in philosophy and in politics, which is that we get so convinced with like extrapolating things out to their natural logic that we end up in fantasy land that's not good for anyone, right? So yeah, one of the early Stoics was like, there is no good or bad. It's all in our heads. Or that only good is good and only bad is bad, and there's no gray area, and you end up kind of in this almost like religious dogmatic point of view, and Seneca sort of cuts through this knot, and he just goes like, look, guys, it's probably better to be tall than short most of the time. It's probably better to be rich than poor most of the time, and he's saying. That's not, he's saying, I'm not saying if you're poor, your life sucks and you can't find happiness, or that you can't do anything about it. He's just saying that generally this is what we'll prefer. And he's saying a Stoic is going to try to make the most good out of whatever it's born. You know, like he's saying like, look, like a Stoic would rather have both eyes. But if they lose one of their eyes in battle, they're not going to be like, life is meaningless. Like I should, you know, what's the use of continuing? And so this idea of preferred indifference to me is great. It's like, look, I'm glad that I've been successful, but I'm also, and I'm going to enjoy the fruits of that while I can, but I'm also not going to become so dependent on it that the thought of losing it racks me with anxiety or makes me do unethical things in order to maintain it. So the Stoics are trying to get to a place of sort of independence, and I think that's really important. But
independence from what? Independence
from externals, right? So that like the happiness, and when he's saying preferred indifference, I think he's meaning like that hey, if you wake up today and it's raining, here's your plan for a rainy day. And if you wake up and it's sunny and beautiful, here's a plan for a sunny day. But you don't wake up and the weather determines the quality of your day, you know? And I think that's a thing a lot of people struggle with. And I think politically, look, obviously, if you lean right or left, you hope that your party is in power. But like, you should also get to a place where you're like, here's what the line is, right? And so that I would much rather have someone I disagree with. Like, I think about this in business. Like, look, would you rather the CEO of the company you work for generally agree with your vision for the company and support exactly the direction that you want to go? Yes. You also, though, you need to have someone who's ethical, who's competent, who's reliable, you know, who's you know, does all the things you need in a leader that are not really political or directional in any way. You know what I mean? Like you would also want to see.
I'm gonna jump in here and say that I think this is the first step on a slippery slope to where we're at now. What I would say is going back to everything should be an echo of your goal. So I literally lived what you're talking about in business, where I had ideas. They ended up being bad ideas. It was very emotionally gratifying to have my ideas be the one that the CEO took and moved with. Yep. And then we hit a day where I knew I was arguing for an idea that was bad, but for ego reasons, I needed to be right. I just needed that, sure, the salve of like, okay, finally, I'm not stupid. Like I've got something working for me. And even if it's just being able to win the argument, that alone made me feel smart. But there was a voice in my head screaming in the middle of my convincing arguments, this will move you away from a successful company. And so I have this moment of crisis around what the fuck is my actual goal? What do I want?
Right.
Just be honest. Don't fucking bullshit. This is a private moment, you and yourself. Just be honest about what you actually want so you can move through the world in a way that actually moves you towards your goals. And I realized I had these two competing goals. I wanted to feel smart, meaning even if I drive the company into the ground, and then I wanted to be successful. And they were actually coming into competition. And so I had to figure out like a way to tease those out. So that's why I don't think people need to be very tense if they're saying to themselves, I would generally like the country or the company to be run with the people that see the world my way. You should want the people running the country that have the same goal and that are accurate in their ability to assess what's moving you towards that goal. Now, that I'll get behind all day. Left, right, center, up, down, whatever the qualifications of the CEO, I don't give a shit. And this is why, like in my own company, I'm always telling people, I'm not capable. I don't have enough time and I'm not intelligent enough to think of all the right ideas to move this company forward. So I promise you one thing, I'm a slave to what moves us towards our goal. So here's our goal. It's both exciting and honorable, to get to your point about virtues and all that. So this is something that uplifts not only myself and you guys, but humanity in general. Okay. So it's exciting and it's honorable. Now, I'm going to be beholden to that. So whoever's got the right idea, if you think I'm doing something stupid, I want you to say the words, I think this is stupid. Don't try to be nice. Don't try to be kind. Right. Just fucking tell me the truth. Because now we can battle the ideas. And if we can think through them and not have to actually test it, great. If we can't, then, and it seems plausible, then we'll run that test. Now, that may, oh God, I really hope like that people hear the distinction between those, because I'm not trying to split hairs. That to me is like, is the first step in a direction, either leaning into I have my worldview is right, and therefore I want people to crystallize around my worldview, and I'm going to vote for people that are there, versus what's your goal and who's going to help actually get you towards that goal. Now, if you have a pathologized goal that is fucking sinister or ignorant and will actually lead to our downfall and you just can't see it, that's a whole nother can of worms.
Well, so the Stoics had this expression, character is fate. And so my point is, I'm saying, obviously you want someone to be aligned with your goals, but I would also be okay being led by or working for someone who maybe we actually do have different goals, as provided I get to do my sort of basic thing. But what I'm never going to do or never want to be in a position, and I've been in this position before, where you're working for someone who actually maybe you do share a goal, but fundamentally they're flawed as far as character goes, or ethics go, or they treat people poorly, or they have some vice or addiction or flaw, that it doesn't matter how talented you are, it doesn't matter how good the goal is, or even how good the plan to get to the goal is. Eventually that person will destroy themselves and you and the organization. And so, I think we see this in business all the time, and business is always less loaded. You'll have the right company, the right vision, everything, but they still fail. Why do they fail? It's because there was something culturally flawed in the organization that's usually stemming from the leader. So I think and this is something the Stoics talk about over and over and over again, that they're like, the reason that a leader needs to study philosophy is that philosophy is about the development of character, and that no amount of competence can make up for a deficiency in character. And whether you're looking at, companies going into the financial crisis, or you're looking at Enron, or you're looking even at Uber, where Uber was this great company, but they'd sort of created a win at all costs culture that eventually meant that they were sleeping on a sexual harassment issue and some legal issues and a whole bunch of things that were eventually a ticking time bomb that ended up pushing the founder out of the company. And, WeWork's probably another great example of this. You have to ultimately think about the pathology of the person in charge, or if you are in charge, the pathology that's motivating you, or, and this is why I wrote Ego is the Enemy. It doesn't matter how brilliant you are, how talented you are, how right you are. Ego will eventually tear your team, organization, your business apart, because it's fundamentally a bad form. It's a corrosive fuel. And I think, even if the Republicans or the Democrats, to bring this back to politics, are right, if they're pursuing a strategy because its primary purpose is to wrestle power from the other side, or to dominate, or to shove it down somebody's throats, that's a bad reason for doing a good thing, and it will eventually come back to haunt them. If they're doing it because it fundamentally helps the most people, then again, I'd rather live under a regime that's passing laws or policies that I disagree with, but I think are being done for good reasons, than my fantasy country, but that is a shield or an excuse for some ominous bad actor.
Ooh, okay, so this is really fucking interesting. So I am way into this idea that philosophy is about developing character. I think that character is absolutely critical because, to me, what you're pointing at with, say, Uber, you've got somebody who's playing a finite game versus an infinite
Yes.
game. So in a finite game, there actually is a finish line to cross, and cool, okay, just ignore the sexual harassment shit, whatever. We finally got across the finish line, and now we're good. Versus if you realize this is an infinite game, this is something, there is no finish line. There is only like, what are you trying to become? What does that journey look like? And all of us are, lives will get cut short before the sort of finish line of,
Sure.
the universe dies a death, of there's no more energy left in the system and it all collapses down on itself. So that, like, if you make the right distinction of this is an infinite game. My goal is to have character. And by the way, back to my obsession about utility, to have character, because in a group of humans, that is the thing that you need to not wake up one day with a knife in your fucking back. And
Right.
that when you're not just thinking about yourself, but you're thinking about other people. And I think it actually is critical that you also think about yourself. You're trying to empower yourself, become a total fucking badass. That's my language. I get that. But like, you're trying to make the most of yourself, but all the while not doing it at the expense of the group. And if you do those things, so you're building character through philosophy, you are playing the infinite game, but you also are taking a tremendous amount of personal responsibility and saying, like, the systems can't do this for me. I must do it for myself. Going back to your idea of living in a democracy, you don't just get to roll up and be like, yo, this democracy is rad. Glad I get to take advantage of it. It's like you are part of the people by which the government is able to rule. So getting in that headspace and then saying, okay, well, if I've got somebody that is there, so I'll point to Mao's China and I will say, I am at the edge of what I understand. And so nobody need think that they have to chastise me in order to get me to dig farther into this. Like,
Sure.
this is a timestamp, right, of where I'm at in discovering all this, going back to the whole culture wars and all that. To me is the microbiome. I'm just now beginning to learn it even exists and that I need to pay attention to it because it actually has things in my life. But I will say that on paper, like, what they were trying to do sounded pretty cool. Like, I get how people go, yeah. Like, this should be how we should approach things. And yet the Cultural Revolution of Mao's China ended up killing ungodly number of millions of people, right? So he may have killed them with the best of intentions, but like, I still don't give him a pass. I'm like,
Of course.
it's one of those things that you can just say, certainly now, maybe he didn't have the historical knowledge to be able to say, oh, I get where this goes. It's like, you may not want to extrapolate into Candyland, but you do want to extrapolate enough to be like, where does this go? Even if I have good intentions, does this end somewhere well?
No, I mean, look, as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and when you look at a lot of those utopian experiments, at the core of them is one, a fundamental denial of what Robert Greene would call human nature, right? And a violation of all the laws of human nature. It's projecting an idea of the world rather than reflecting back what the world is, and then there's also a stridency and a certainty that like Mao's China fails as all totalitarian regimes eventually fail because they cannot brook dissent or debate, and they have to eradicate their enemies because they fundamentally don't have an answer for the enemies. I think to go back to this idea of character, and I'm really glad you compared it to an infinite game. I wrote that down. Character is what you need for the infinite game of life. And if we look at like religion, like Christianity is basically saying, like, look, you need to have good character, you need to treat people well, don't sin, don't do this and that. And they're saying this basically, they're like, because Jesus says, right? They're saying, like, if you don't, you'll go to hell, right? And that's a convincing argument, right? I get that. as someone who I think I tend to focus more on the philosophical things, so philosophy is sort of my guide. What the Stoics are saying is they're saying, look, character and being a good person and doing all this, you're not doing it because there's some reward at the end. You're doing it or a punishment at the end. They're saying if you if you live without character, you will live in hell. Your life will become a form of hell. And so I think that's something that we don't talk about enough. And that's one of the things I love about Marcus Aurelius. Here you have this guy with absolute power, and so he suddenly becomes king, and he kind of looks around, and we have this idea: absolute power corrupts absolutely. He's like, what happened to all the people who sat in this chair before me? Why did they become so evil and bad? And how did that happen? And was it worth it? Was it worth it to be Alexander the Great or whomever? And he basically sort of realizes, like, these guys weren't having a good time, that it's to be insatiable, to have no ethical bounds for your behavior, to be entirely, focused on the self, to be obsessed and validated only by winning, to have no cause that you truly are committed to other than your own advancement. He basically is saying, like, first off, all these people died just like everyone else, right? And then he's saying, actually, it was a miserable, lonely, awful way to live. And so I think we need to the reward for virtue is the virtuous life, right? Like, and the reward for vice, they call this the sort of the choice of Hercules. The decision to take the easy road seems easy, but in the end, it's actually the worst, miserable, most hard and difficult road. And the road of virtue is more challenging, and there's less immediate rewards, but it's ultimately much more fulfilling and peaceful and happy and all of that. So I think, character is not just this thing you're doing because somebody said you should do it. It's something you're doing. It's the best strategy.
Yeah. So I love that. Let's talk about being insatiable. Let's talk about Zeno. You open the book, Lives of the Stoics, with Zeno, and it's a very interesting story, and it sums up, like, the one person in the book maybe that I resonated the most with was Zeno, in that here you have this guy who's very successful, and then he loses everything. And in a fucking shipwreck. Like, it's crazy. Yeah. Like, you realize this is some OG shit. They did not have insurance. There was no way to, like, easily get back in the game. And so this guy goes from, like, riding highs, doing great, and then poof, it's all gone. And now he's got to, like, one of the most, and I imagine it would have been even harder back then in the story you tell about him. I think it was him that had to carry the lentil soup and to, like, embarrass him, because that's what poor people ate. And so that his fucking teacher made him, like, walk this whole city after he's lost everything. People are already basically making fun of him for being poor now. And now he's got to walk with, like, the thing that just shows he's fucking poor. And he smashes the thing, and he's got, this poor person soup all over him. And he's literally shaking, at least as you retell it. And I thought, okay, this is fucking interesting. He has this sort of epiphany of, like, okay, I can't invest in this. And I can't invest in being a rich person and the way that other people look at me, and to your idea of independence and breaking free of what other people think. So here's how I look at it. Now, I have chosen to value greatness. Not saying other people need to do it. I'm just saying it's something I have chosen to do, which in the last time we talked, we differentiated between success and greatness. And I think success is sort of personally defined. Like, whatever makes you feel the way you want to feel, that's success. Greatness is like your name echoes through the annals of history, right? Just people are so blown away by what you accomplish. It becomes like this thing to aim at. So anyway, I dig that. I'm into it. But that's my, like, moment pre-shipwreck. But the good news is I'm constantly having shipwrecks. So I'm striving towards this thing, and I'm building up, whether it's esteem or accolade or whatever, but it's inevitable that I fuck up and I do something wrong, and now I bounce back, and I have truly embarrassed myself. And that's happened to me 1,000 times. I mean, maybe that's an exaggeration, but it happens so often. So anyway, I think of these, like, I probably think of them as two pedals, or maybe two buckets that I can alternate between. So I'm like, I want to be insatiable. I want to actually value myself on pursuing greatness. Like, not at all costs, because you're right. I always say I will do anything within my code of ethics to achieve my success. Now, that within my code of ethics thing is critically important. I think you would translate that as character. So there's this, I want to be a certain kind of person chasing this shit. But every time I fall, I go, it's all good. I don't value myself for actually being that anyway. I only value the pursuit.
Well, so here's what I would not push back on, but here's a way to think about it. To me, greatness is a very elastic, flexible idea. And Zeno may have been great as a merchant, and that may have been what he was called to be great at, and he was great at it in the moment. And then fortune intervenes and he loses everything, and then he becomes greatness in another form. So Epictetus, who's like, all the Stoics talk about adversity, but Epictetus is a slave for 30 years, and he's horribly abused, and he's broken, and like to be a slave in Rome is like, you're as expendable can be. And he has this line, he says, the podium and a prison are the same place. And what he means is that the podium, like where the emperor stands or a senator stands, and then a prison, they're both opportunities for greatness, right? Like, so Marcus Aurelius is great because he happens to find himself the emperor of Rome, and he's great because per his code of ethics, the power doesn't change him. He fights for the little guy. He keeps Rome together. He heroically leads Rome through the Antonine Plague, which is a 15-year pandemic, so on and so forth. But Epictetus is born as low as you can get in the Roman Empire, and his greatness is that this does not break him. There's a scene where Epictetus's master grabs his leg and is like basically torturing his slave just for the pure sadistic pleasure of it. And he's twisting the leg, and Epictetus just looks him in the eye and he says, "You're going to break my leg. You're going to break my leg. Why are you doing this? You're going to break my leg." And then finally the leg snaps, and he just looks him in the eye and he says, "I told you that was going to happen." Like that is fucking human greatness at a level that is actually, to me, more impressive than Marcus Aurelius leading the troops in battle. It's great because it's purely self-contained and resolute and unbreakable and unbeatable and so on and so forth. So
meaning I want you to go deeper on that, meaning that he doesn't become emotional about it?
It's one, he's complete master. He's like that monk lighting himself on fire to protest the Vietnam War. He's transcended the limitations of his human form. But I think more importantly, the only thing he's retained is his sheer defiance, his giant middle finger at the institution of slavery, right? Like this experience, he walks with a limp for the rest of his life. This could have made him bitter. He could have committed suicide. He could have, become an addict. He could have done anything. And instead, he perseveres through, and he says, his lameness or a limp, he says, is an impediment to the body, but not to the spirit. And so the point is, it's Epictetus is great on the level of Nelson Mandela being great in his prison cell. Now, Nelson Mandela also after prison then becomes great as a leader, as a leader of a nation. But the idea for the Stoics is that you can be great anywhere and anything, and that greatness and excellence, like they would call us arete, excellence is worth striving for. It's the only thing worth striving for. Just you want to get to a place where you don't conflate excellence solely with external accomplishments or fame or money, which is what a lot of people do. You know what I mean? Like I'll give you a more modern example. A few years ago, they found that one of the actors on the Cosby Show had, sort of bounced out of acting, and he was working at Trader Joe's. And somebody snapped a picture of him, and they were sort of making fun of him. But to me, like the greatness of being like, well, I can't be an actor anymore. I got to provide for my family. I'm going to fucking work at Trader Joe's, and I'm going to do a good job of it, is also greatness because it contains all those same virtues that we're talking about. And so I think when we're talking about being indifferent, what we're talking about is being indifferent to things that are not in our control. Like you could have invented, or let's say you're a mathematician, you come up with some brilliant new theory that fundamentally changes mathematics, but you die in obscurity, and it's not until after your death that your genius was discovered and appreciated. That doesn't, to the Stoics, that doesn't make you any more or less great. the greatness was the act, and the fact that society didn't understand is irrelevant.
I want to go back to Epictetus. I clearly do not know enough of his story. One, I want to know. I want to go a little bit further into the why it was great that his leg was broken. And trust me, I agree with you. I want to actually articulate it. And this notion of being able to transcend your emotions and to not give in to them, not let them steer you. And I know you get pushback on that. Is that to you like when you say the podium and the prison are the same, what is the element of greatness that the Stoics would say you can cultivate? Is it the four virtues? Is it...
So James Stockdale, Admiral Stockdale, is a fighter pilot in Vietnam. He's shot down over Vietnam. He's the highest ranking prisoner in American prisoner taken prisoner in the Vietnam War. And he had studied Epictetus in college. He'd gone back for a degree at Stanford, and he was introduced by his professor to Epictetus. And he had Epictetus like in his bunk on the ship. And as he's parachuting down, he says to himself, I'm going to be in here for a long time. He says, I'm entering the world of Epictetus. And what he meant is that he's leaving the world. Yeah, it's an incredible story. One of the great heroes of the 20th century. And he's parachuting down, and he knows that he's far removed from his fighter jet. He's far removed from the great, powerful country that he's from. He's far removed from his family. He's far removed from all the things that he'd accumulated in his life up until this point. But he's saying, I'm going down here, and there's going to be other soldiers, and my greatness, my duty is going to be surviving this ordeal and doing the right thing inside this ordeal. And so he's actually, first off, a little interesting trivia. I was speaking to his son not long ago, and his son was like, actually, my dad wasn't the highest ranking prisoner. He was the highest ranking prisoner who stepped forward and assumed a leadership role. There were other prisoners that, for whatever reason, said, I don't want to take that heat. And he took it, right? And from basically day one, he institutes sort of a culture of defiance inside this prison. Like, for instance, they're going to put him on national television to show that the prisoners are being treated well inside this prison, which is not the case, right? And so they send him into this bathroom. They say, look, take a shower. Here's a razor. I want you to shave. And then we're going to put you on camera. He walks into the bathroom, and he grabs the razor, and he just cuts a giant gash across his forehead. So he can't be used for propaganda purposes. And they come in, and they're like, oh my God, what have you done? Like, what, And so they go to get some bandages and stuff. And he realizes that as hard as he tried, they're probably just going to be able to bandage this cut and put him on television anyway. So he grabs a stool, and he beats his own face in, right? And they come in, and they say, what are we going to tell the commander? And he says, you can tell the commander that I'm not fucking going downtown. And so this is basically, he's imprisoned, he's shackled in irons, he's beaten, he's tortured. At one point, he realizes, because he's become kind of famous, because of his position there, that they can't afford to lose him, right? That like it would be bad for the North Vietnamese if something were to happen to this pig. But they're still torturing the prisoners anyway. So one day his hands are tied behind his back in this room. It's the only room with a window in the prison. And he can see down below they're torturing other American troops. And so he hobbles over in the chair, like you can imagine him doing this, and he shatters the window, and he grabs the shards of glass, and he cuts his own wrists, knowing that he's basically saying, like, if you don't stop this, I'm going to kill myself, and you're going to have a world of hurt. So what I'm trying to say is that there are all different forms of greatness. Michael Jordan has a form of greatness. Bill Gates or Warren Buffett have a form of greatness. Elon Musk has a form of greatness. But there's also just the core resiliency and determination and unbreakable spirit of the human race that's also a form of greatness. And the Stoics wanted us to know that we are descendant from those people too, and that like Seneca has this great line. He says, if they can force you to do it, you don't know how to die. And
Jesus.
his point was that the tyrant, doesn't actually have any control over you, right? But this is where the Stoics are complicated. So Seneca says, if they can force you to do something you don't want to do, it's because you don't know how to die, right? Now that is fucking badass. That's like a movie badass, right? And yet Seneca ends up working for several years as Nero's right-hand man, one of the horrendous tyrants of Rome's, long history of horrendous tyrants. And so, again, what the Stoics present, I think, is an impossible ideal that maybe people manage to briefly touch for a few minutes. And ultimately, Seneca does end up dying. He dies loosely implicated in a conspiracy to assassinate Nero. But the point is, the greatness of Seneca as a writer, to me, is actually less impressive than the other Stoics who resisted Nero more courageously. And I would trade all of Seneca's beautiful writings for just one or two of those anecdotes of James Stockdale in that prison camp, because that's greatness in deed versus greatness in words.
Is James Stockdale still alive?
He's not. He died in, I think, 2005 or 2006. He won the Medal of Honor. I've been lucky enough. I've spoken at the Stockdale Center at the Naval Academy. But he is. So two things I think you'll love. So one, he's one of the great heroes of the Navy and of American history. But if you remember why you've heard of James Stockdale, he's Ross Perot's running mate when Ross Perot runs for president in '92 or whatever. And Dennis Miller has this great line. So when Stockdale runs for vice president, he does the debate, and he doesn't do really well in the debate. He's not a particularly photogenic guy. He kind of makes some gaffes here or there. And Dennis Miller talks about how sad it is, to go to your point about politics. He's like, look, this guy was the first guy into Vietnam, the last guy out of Vietnam. He was courageous and sensitive and brilliant and wise and all these things. And he's like, but he committed the one unpardonable sin of our times, which is that he was bad on television. And so the point is that I think that true Stoic greatness doesn't translate as well, so we don't hear about it as much. But to me, that's true human greatness.
Jesus, dude. Yes, like that is. I now need to like really lean into reading about him. So I read Long Walk to Freedom, Nelson Mandela's book. I've talked about it many, many times. And it's one of those moments where I can tell you right now, and this makes me sad. I'm not as hardcore as Nelson Mandela. I'm definitely not as hardcore as James Stockdale. Like I aspire to be, and I'm not saying I forever accept that, but I know if I were captured right now by somebody, I don't think that I would be able to smash my head into the glass, slice my wrists, just so that they'll leave other people alone. I'd heard the story about beating himself with the chair before, but man, when you realize it as sort of a pattern of behavior, that this guy was just that fucking hardcore, like, and that is a hardcore that I aspire to. That to me really, like, when you tell me a story about him and then you tell me a story about somebody that has business success, like I am infinitely more moved by, and I consider it much harder. Like if you said, hey, you've got two people as close to just sort of middle of the road as you're ever going to get, you've got to make one into a great business leader, or you have to make one into, somebody that can be that hardcore in a prison camp. Give me the business guy. I'll try to make somebody into a business person all day. Like that shit is so much easier than having just the internal fortitude to suffer like that.
Well, and in case people think I'm just some crazy leftist, which I'm not. I mean, I live on a ranch in Texas, so that should give you some sense of it. But like John McCain is in that same prison camp as Stockdale, and because we saw McCain as a modern day politician, we forgot that he was also the embodiment of human greatness in that camp. Like people don't understand. So John McCain is shot down, also goes into the prison camp, but his father was the theater commander for the Navy in the Vietnam War. So imagine if you're a prisoner of war camp and you get the son of the guy who's leading the war. Like, imagine what you would do. And first off, you can imagine they subject him to all sorts of torture and horrible things. And then they decide a different track, and they say, you're free to go home. They tell John McCain he can leave. And now the armed forces have a very strict protocol about prisoner of war, and it's first one in, first one out. So like there's no special treatment for rank or for fame, or just because one guy has kids doesn't mean he gets to go home before the guy that's been there longest, right? And so they go to McCain and they say, you can go home, and they're trying to let him go home to hammer in the point that that Vietnam was a rich man's war but a poor man's fight. They wanted to embarrass the United States by saying, like, look, they let the general's son go home because that's all they really care about. And so they give McCain a chance to go home, and he says no. So he stayed for 7 years in a POW camp where he was tortured, where he permanently loses the use of his arm, where he undergoes all sorts of torture that gives him PTSD, and that he very easily could have died from, that he doesn't see his family. He did that in a sense voluntarily, because he would not exempt himself from the rules or take special treatment, because that special treatment would come at the expense of someone else. And so again, when as it happens, John McCain wrote a book called Character is Destiny. The point is, only someone of incredibly strong character could be able to go, you're giving me a get out of jail free card, literally, and I'm not going to do it because that's unfair to other people. And so again, to me, that's what greatness is. And I get really inspired talking about it. And then as you said, you have to have the humility to go like, wow, I don't think I could do that. I don't think I'm there yet. But to me, that's the kind of greatness that we should be aspiring to, just as much as, if not more, of, I would love to sell a company for $100 million. Do you know what I mean? Like we celebrate almost the easier, superficial successes, and then these other things, we just don't even talk about.
Ooh, man, that is interesting. Why we don't talk about it. So the preferred indifference thing is why, like, the reason I tell people, no matter how many billionaires commit suicide, there is a reason that people will continue to pursue money, because money it actually lets you do something. So it is a great facilitator. It has tremendous value. Now, it doesn't have the value that people think it has, which is that it will make you feel differently about yourself because you've obtained it. And part of the reason that rich kids end up so sort of emotionally in a dark place is that you've been given something that you didn't have to work for, and there are just innate psychological ramifications of that. In fact, one thing I wanted to talk about is, like, what is human nature? And I would say the doing hard things to achieve something that matters. So self-worth to me is predicated on doing something you believe is worthy. And if you don't do something you believe is worthy, you will never have self-worth. Nobody can love you to self-worth. You can never earn your way to self-worth financially. You can only earn your way to self-worth by doing something that you think is worthy, which almost always is born out of doing some really hard shit. And so that idea of this is what we should be aspiring towards, I'm with you 1,000%, because it lines up more than any other kind of success. It lines up with human nature, with what you have an intrinsic program to value. Now, the question is, why don't we talk about it? And I'm going to guess part of the reason that we don't talk about it is it isn't sexy. It's making you look at something that's hard and gnarly. And I think, like me, if I look at that, I come up wanting. I come up wishing I were that badass. I come up having to confront that I'm not that badass yet. And that is probably deeply uncomfortable. Do you think there's something else at play as to why we don't celebrate that?
Yeah, I think the big reason is that it's sincere, and it feels a little cheesy and a little lame to be like I was just writing about this. There's this great Doris Kearns Goodwin who biographized Theodore Roosevelt. She says, uh, Theodore Roosevelt was the kind of kid that grew up reading books about, the great men of history and decided he would be just like them. And when she says that, I detect a little bit of a sneer, like a little bit of some condescension. Do you know what I mean? It's like believing in fairy tales, right? And so I think we're a society that's ironic. We're a society that's sarcastic and cynical, and we're not a society that, unlike the ancients, that celebrates those heroes, right? Like even now, when we look at history, and look, I agree, there are things at history that need to be pointed out, inescapable facts and tragedies and inexcusable occurrences. But we look at history primarily today to talk about how shitty everyone was. That this person was a racist, this person was a slave owner, this person, didn't take care of their workers. And, we look through history almost exclusively to judge the past by the present, and to almost tell ourselves this narrative about how crappy we have been to each other for a long time. And it didn't always used to be that way. I mean, people recited the Odyssey because Odysseus is the hero, right? And they told the stories of the 300 Spartans, and all they told themselves these stories because that's how they passed on these lessons to the next generation. And I mean, I see all the superheroes behind you, but it's like we now own, like, superheroes are the only characters in art or entertainment that are heroic. You know what I mean? Everyone else is your Don Drapers, or everyone else is this sort of twisted, dark, bad, brooding, anti-hero. I think we've lost the ability to be like, this is what greatness looks like. This is what every man, like, just because the heroes were all male in the past doesn't mean that men and women can't aspire to be like Churchill during the Second World War. Just because Churchill was also wrong about India, about women's rights, about all sorts of other things, doesn't mean that he wasn't great in that moment. The Vietnam War was a war that probably never should have been fought. But that doesn't mean that Stockdale and McCain weren't great in the instance in the moment that they found themselves in. So to me, a big part of it is we're just so damn cynical that we don't talk about heroes and we don't talk about greatness. And then we wonder why people don't have it.
Yeah, man, that is, I think, a very decisive, very insightful breakdown of why we look away from that.
That's what I try to do in my books. But like what gets me excited is writing stories about these people. I feel like I get to have a conversation with them, and I get to live in that moment of greatness a little bit. And I'm not saying I'm ever going to be in a situation like they are, but it does help me. If I'm deciding between this or that, am I going to say something? Go to your point earlier, am I going to keep my mouth shut for business reasons? Whatever it is, these examples, forged in much more severe circumstances, help you go. Like I was writing about this morning. Like there's this Anne Frank quote about hope and courage, and I was just like, if this little girl could be courageous, living in an attic, hiding out from the Nazis, who in a matter of months are going to break in and murder her. That's what happens. If she can have hope, what fucking excuse do I have to be jaded and cynical because, I think the world is going to pieces. Do you know what I mean? I think these examples really do make a difference if you let them.
Yeah, cynicism is something I didn't realize was an actual school of thought, and I want to cover that in a minute. Don't let me forget.
I'll write it down.
Thank you. But there is another idea. When you were talking, you talk about, one that we're trying to, there's almost like this desire to erase history, which I don't fully, I can articulate to you the motives that people are using, but I don't understand the emotional impulse that people have, and I just haven't thought enough about it, but seems very unwise. I've either heard you say or you quoted in the book, I can no longer remember which, this notion of, I think it was Seneca or one of the Stoic philosophers,
Sure.
says, I will quote a sentence from a bad writer if he has something profound to say. And I think that is very wise. Like, instead of looking for reasons to rule people out, look for, do they have some nugget of wisdom that you can glean that will actually help you with something? But then you also said something about, most of the heroes are men. Have you read Solzhenitsyn's book, The Gulag Archipelago?
Uh-huh.
Dude, he says something in there. Something tells me that if you dive into that period of history in Russia, that what may come to the forefront is a certain thing that women have that I find really fascinating, which he said that the people who ended up dying for their beliefs, that wouldn't just finally hit a point where they'd be like, yes, fine, like I denounce them and they're full of shit. He was like, the only people that would just keep going and going and going, saying, no, I will not, I will not, I will not, until they're dead, was women. And there was this sense of like, there is and look, these are distributions. So of course there are going to be guys that are willing to do that. But like, as you go to the extremes and you start looking at, in these crazy scenarios, it just like most of the violent offenders in prison are men does not mean that there aren't violent female offenders. Sure. It just means as you look at overlapping graphs as you get to the extremes, then you get sort of that tail. So anyway, that my gut is there's a thing that happens around like, I won't relent, I won't give up, I won't, something that women have. And I see it in my wife. So it's one of those things where I'm like, my wife actually, like, I think I'm pretty fucking hardcore, but there is some band of thing where like my wife just leaves me in awe of like where she just isn't going to back down. Like it's pretty inspiring.
No, it's super inspiring. And so one of the things that I was really intent on in the book is that I would not let the book be 100% men. It's about ancient Stoics. So of course the vast majority of the characters are men. That's not because men are superior. It's that only men were allowed in many cases to do a lot of these things. But Cato, who's one of the sort of towering Stoics, decides to teach his daughter philosophy, which is, a pretty transgressive thing at the turn of the millennium. And so she becomes just as Stoic as he is. And so for people who are familiar with the story of the assassination of Julius Caesar, you think Brutus, you think the senators, you don't realize that actually Brutus's wife is Portia, Cato's daughter, and that she was the steel backbone behind the whole thing. So Brutus is kind of thinking about, he's thinking, he knows, Caesar's a tyrant. He's destroyed the Republic. He's a dictator. He knows he wants to do something and he's thinking about it. And his wife, just like my wife, and I'm sure your wife, she just senses that something is going on that he's not telling her. And she realizes that he's probably has a secret that he's afraid if she knows, not that she'll tell, but that in Rome, if there was a conspiracy, anyone who was suspected to be involved would be subjected to extreme torture to confess. And so she realizes that what he doubts is her ability to withstand torture, which of course is absurd because anyone who has seen a woman go through childbirth understands that women are like 500 times stronger than men and can endure like if men gave birth, every man would get an epidural like 2 seconds after you walk into the hospital. Do you know what I mean? Like no man would ever give birth naturally. It would not even be a question, right? So anyways, she realizes that he doubts her. And so what she does, and she realizes like, actually, I don't know how I would stand up under torture. So she stabs herself in the leg with a knife and then with a penknife. And then she says, I'm going to see how long I can just take the pain. And so she does this. Hours and hours, she just sits there and endures like a gaping leg wound. And then when her husband comes home, she's like, look at this. She's like, if you think She's like, is it not enough that I'm Cato's daughter? Is it not enough that I'm your wife? Is it not enough that I have proven to you that I can withstand the worst pain imaginable that you would not tell me? And he does tell. Not only does he tell her, but in Shakespeare's play about it, he says something like, now I have to live up to my wife's courage. Like he realizes that, she's stronger than he is. And so, we have this sense of like history being all these big, strong men doing this, this, and this. And in a way, the more I think about it, it's the women who were more stoic, because not only did they endure most of the same adversity and difficulty and loss, but they didn't demand any credit or attention. You know what I mean? Like, to me, the most stoic thing of all is just to quietly endure, pain and difficulty and not let anyone see you sweat, and so I think there's this element where we've misunderstood the absence of women from a lot of the historical events. Like, sure, pioneers crossed, the American West, but it was a whole family affair. You know what I mean? And just because we've heard the names of this man or, this other one, it doesn't mean that there wasn't someone else sitting in the wagon right next to him.
Dude, we're about to go into a really interesting time. We're already in the thick of it. So growing up with the notion of behind every great man is a great woman, and that was to be celebrated, and that there wasn't a big push, for women to step out front. But now there is, right? Now there's I bought it myself and I control my own destiny. And I am very curious to see what happens to men as that dynamic begins to break down, because I will speak from my own experience that I would not be the man that I am today without Lisa. And I say that not in like somebody who wants to say something nice about their wife. I say it in that my wife was like, yo, motherfucker, you said you were going to do something with your life. Hop to it. And not in a mean way. And she always gets very defensive when I categorize it like that. But she was obviously loving and warm, and that was what drew me to her. But she didn't fuck around. And so I'll give you the lamest example ever. There was a moment where I was eating less than I'd ever eaten in my life, and I was getting fat. And I was very frustrated because this was a low fat thing. So I cut fat out, and of course you replace it with sugar. And that was like all the hype and the craze, and that's what everybody said you should be doing. And so I'm now going in the wrong direction. I come from a morbidly obese family. And so I'm like getting real paranoid that I'm, headed in a bad direction. And I'm like, fuck, my genetics have just given up. Like, this is my fate, but I was really unhappy about it. I discovered low carb, and I'm like, oh, maybe this is the answer. I just need to cut out carbs. Now, for anybody that's gone from a low-fat, high-sugar diet to what I did was basically high-protein, low-fat, no sugar, it is brutal. You go through a period of headaches and like all this stuff. And I went to my wife one day and I was angry about the fact that this was such a hard transition. And I was like, if I had a cookie, I would just feel better. And she was basically like, it is the way it is. So you're going to keep whining about it? Or are you going to see this through? You said you wanted to do it. What do you want me to do right now? You want me to be like boo-hoo and cry with you? Or are you going to recognize on the other side of this headache is the thing that you seek? Now, my wife did that 1,000 different times. All these moments of weakness where she helped me become the person that I wanted to become, that I professed I was attempting to become. But she would kick me in the ass when what I needed was a kick in the ass. And so she and I went through this period where she was finding her greatness through me by helping me become the person that I wanted to be. She didn't have any interest in going out into the world to do that. She thought she was going to be a mother, and like she was good with that, and she was going to pursue her art, but she wasn't trying to, sort of be out in the world and be an entrepreneur.
Sure.
But then we flip, and now 10 years into our marriage, she decides she actually does want to become an entrepreneur. She does want to step forward. She does want to go on that journey by herself. And I think, fuck, what if she had been running her own race when I was trying to become something, and I didn't have somebody that I wanted to sleep with, quite frankly, that I had all this I had every reason you can imagine to want her to find me powerful and attractive and sexy. And so, fuck, you better do the work to become someone worthy of her attraction. And that was a huge thing for me. And now if women aren't playing that role, and I'm not saying that they should have to, like I told my wife, I am here to help make sure you have whatever life you want. I will give whatever up I need to make sure that you can become the person you want to become. But I think there are going to be consequences.
I think there will be consequences, but in a sense, like I think it just means it's more on the individual. So like this is something I've never really understood by a lot of these, like you get these sort of alt-righty figures who are like, now there's women in the workplace and then there's all these different races and it's not fair. And it's like, dude,
do people actually say that shit?
Well, yeah. What I'm saying, you get what I think you're seeing politically is a resentment. Like it's like when you're used to what they say is like when you're used to privilege, equality feels like a punishment, right? It feels like you're losing something, right? And you don't think of like go back 50 years. If you're a white person in this country, you have 15 to 30% less, let's just say 15 to 50% less competition, right? It's like if women are kept out of certain industries, or if black people are kept out of certain industries, or if, there's less competition. Like, why is college harder to get into now? It's because it's a global competition now. People from China are trying to get into Harvard too, and their smart kids might be smarter than you, right? So what we're existing in now is a world of a lot more competition, right? Like where everyone has an equal shot. Suddenly, the meritocracy is not so fun because if you don't have what it takes, you don't have what it takes, right? And so when I see people, you see someone every once in a while express one of these kind of regressive beliefs, and what I see in those beliefs is fear, a fear of not being able to cut it, right? Those protesters at Chancellorsville or whatever who were like Charlottesville who were like, they will not replace us. I'm not worried about getting fucking replaced because I know I can cut it. And if you tell me that, hey, this was okay 20 years ago and that was the rules everyone was playing by, and now the rules are this, I'm going to adjust. You know what I mean? Like you hear these old guys who are like, you used to be able to tell a woman this, or you used to be able to make these kind of jokes at the office, and now you can't. It's like, you are the one that sounds like a little bitch. You know what I mean? Like you are the one that sounds like you cannot adjust to changing realities or changing I guess what I'm saying is what I'm not afraid of, and I think what is at the core of a lot of people's fears is a fear of change. And the reality is, sure, yeah, society is changing. The women used to not have a lot of options, and now they have a lot of options, and that changes things. And that's going to require people, I think, to adjust. And there's going to be pros and cons, I'm sure. But I think if you really have what it takes, you're going to find a way to thrive in this environment. It's like they changed the rules in football. Do you quit, or do you go, oh, okay, this is what a pass interference looks like now, and I'm not going to do that when I'm defending a wide receiver. Like, to me, it's not that complicated. But I think, again, what Stoicism is about, look, I don't control that, so I accept it. I come to terms with it. And by the way, in this case, obviously very much agree with it. But it's like, I don't control it. I'm going to accept it. I'm going to make the most of it, because that's what our job in life is to do.
All right. You ready to take this somewhere dangerous?
All right, let's do it. We just were somewhere pretty dangerous. So
no. Now we walked up next to the third rail. Now we're going to like grab a hold of it and lick it a little.
All right.
So everything that you just said, I'm totally on board with. And I think that you're right. It's fear of change. It's people don't think that they can cut it. It's also, they have the wrong value system, in my opinion, because they value themselves for being something, for ranking in a certain order, instead of sincerely pursuing something. Because look, if I were going to play basketball, I would say my pursuit is to be the greatest of all time. And I'm pretty sure that physically, I just don't have what you're only able to build on something, right? So my favorite quote, you're not able to make a racehorse out of a pig, but you can make a really fast pig. So, but if I'm trying to become a really fast pig, I think only that I'm going to become the greatest racehorse of all time. And I know in that effort, I will probably top out at a fast pig. So you've got that idea. And I think people should think more like that and not value themselves for whether or not they become the greatest. And then also, to further complicate issues, if I felt that I was the best at something and somebody whispered in my ear, you're only the best at this because you're not letting some people play, all the emotional win that I felt from being good would evaporate. And so to me, the goal of life is how you feel about yourself when you're by yourself. So even if I'm in the number one position, but everybody knows there's somebody better that I'm just not letting play, I wouldn't feel good about that. So what the fuck is the point?
Right.
All right. So the real dangerous thing is as we look at, okay, all these new people are coming into the space and we should be giving everybody equal opportunity. I hear people saying basically out, they don't use these words, but this is definitely the sentiment, which is, there's calls for white men to give up their jobs so a woman or a person of color can come in and have that opportunity. And that's where I'm like, fuck that. Like, one thing I used to say in business was never, ever, ever, ever say, slow down so I can lead. So I love it. Bring every motherfucker into this game. Let's make sure everybody has equal opportunity, meaning that you don't hobble them with a fucking shit education. Like, get these motherfuckers, literally, the thing I'm focused on is making sure, no matter where you live, that your zip code does not determine your success. So I am somebody putting my money where my fucking mouth is about making sure everybody steps to that starting line, ready to fucking rock. Nobody's been hobbled. So, but my thing is, I love that shit. I look around, yeah, I'm so fucking excited. You guys are all here. We're going to go fucking hard for this cake, but I'm going to go hard too. And if you can beat me, fuck yeah. I'm never going to throw a banana peel and try to slip you up. And if I come in last, I come in last. Like, cool. Sure. I will then flip my mind in a very Stoic fashion to being like, at least I get to live in a world with all these rad fucking people. So I'm totally cool with that. But I'm going to play fucking hard. And I would want everybody else to be in like a fun way. Like, we're going for this.
Right. No, I agree. Look, Chrysippus is one of the early Stoics and one of the ones who we know the most about his athletic pursuits. So he's a distance runner, but he ran in this insane distance race. They would do, it was a stadia. I think the distance was called the stadia, and which is, I don't know, it was like 200 yards or 300 yards. They would do like a 5 or 6 mile race of 300-yard wind sprints, basically. So they'd run to one end, touch, back like this. So imagine running 5 miles of wind sprints. It'd be an incredible endurance sport. And you're doing it with other athletes, right? And so again, what I love about the Stoics is that they weren't these like guys in robes just kicking around ideas. They were runners and wrestlers and generals and politicians. And so they knew about competition, and they knew about fighting. And he's like, look, when you're in a race, you want to do everything, you desperately want to win, and you're willing to do anything and everything to win. And it's honorable to do that insofar as you never negatively impact someone else unfairly. So they call this the no shoving principle. So you could say whatever you want to psych someone out. You could engage in some strategy where you're sandbagging at first and then you put on the gas, or you could do whatever it takes to win, but you can't push someone over, right? And I think look, the reality is we've had a system for a long time that, whether we knew it or not, whether you and I engaged in it or not, was predicated on people being pushed over. Like I've talked about this on another podcast. It was like my grandmother my grandmother on my father's side grew up in Arkansas. So, she went to high school, then she went to college. Great. But, and I met her, and, my parents would talk about her. She died when I was very young. But it's like, never did anyone say, did anyone in my family go, grandma's high school was segregated. Black people were not allowed to go to the high school. And if they'd applied to if they'd attempted to attend college with her, they would have been murdered. Right? Like, when you watch the video of those first African Americans trying to go to college in the South in the 1960s, well, my grandmother went to college in the 40s. So, like, never did this come up. So I think one of the things we've not done a good job wrapping our head around is just how real and how recent the shoving in the system was, right? So I agree. I think it should be an even playing field. Everyone should compete, and let the winner be the winner. It's a little hard, obviously, to go, hey, I'm not shoving anyone. It's not fair. It's not fair for you to say I have an unfair advantage when your ancestors have been shoving every single person up until, like 10 minutes ago. And then you're like, well, it's a totally fair thing. So I think I think it's perfectly, and again, let's talk about moderation. I think it's perfectly reasonable to go like, hey, the system's been unfair for a long time. we have to acknowledge that here are the steps we're taking to rectify or make amends for some of the abuses of the past. And here's what we're going to do to ensure an even and level playing field going forward. May the best man, woman, race, whatever win. And so I don't think those are mutually exclusive points, but people try to simplify it and make sure that it is. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I had a guy named Vusi Tembekweo on the show, South African black guy, and grew up in apartheid and talking about like, all right, motherfuckers, now what? Like, now there is no apartheid, and you ultimately stop looking to the system to like, equal everything out so that everybody's equal. He was like, you now are able to enter this race. Become a badass. Like, that is your only option. And my thing is, goal, right? You have this goal of you want everybody, well, I'll say, I have a goal where I want everybody to have equal opportunity. Don't fuck up their education, no shoving, all that shit. But now I expect these motherfuckers to roll up and shine because I know they can. And that's my thing. Like when I see people, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. They want to like help everybody, mollycoddle, all that, and never make demands. Like if you're going to help somebody, you give them the bowl of soup, you fucking break it, you cover them in the soup, and you make them march through town so that they get fucking tough so they know like how to proceed and get better and do their thing. And that, because ultimately that is what a human must do, is go inward, find the internal fortitude, build the skill set so they can go and fucking dominate. Now, it is always, this is why you need that friction. There's always but some people are not going to thrive. And what the fuck do you do with that? And I would say you want systems that take care of them, and you don't want to leave people dying in the streets. But at the same time, you don't want to try to get a quality of outcome, which becomes tyrannical basically instantly.
No, I mean, I think there's an expression, I forget who said it, but they sort of called it the soft bigotry of low expectations. And I think that's certainly real. At the same time, when you look at the numbers and you go, okay, why does the average black family have a lower, net worth than an average white family? Well, a lot of these things are hereditary and they're built up over generations. So
when you say hereditary, what do you mean? That makes me think genetics.
What I'm saying is that, my father started at a level higher up than if you look at black people in the United States, the vast majority of African Americans would have started, as equal citizens, not even after the Civil War, but like legally could not vote until 1965, right? So the idea to go to this point, Ruby Bridges, who was in that famous painting and photograph, the first black little girl to go to school, and I forget what state. She's like 65 right now. Do you know what I mean? Like could not go to school, a regular elementary school, properly budgeted with good teachers, working systems. She's in her 60s, right? So this is all very, very recent. And so the point is, obviously, like what advantages she inherited financially and just as far as like my parents went to college, their parents went to college. I don't know if my great-grandparents went to college, but the point is, here's a great example. My grandfather fought in World War II and came home and got access to the GI Bill to go to college, and he got access to FHA loans and all sorts of things that the same black veterans in the same war did not get. So if you were to compare me, his grandson, to a random person of a different race in a different city with very similar, arc, one would have a greater financial and cultural advantage than the other, right? So my point is, those things exist, and you can't deny that they don't exist, and you can't pretend that it's a perfectly even playing field. So I think you can stipulate all that and then say, still, the situation is the situation. The Stoics would say, you don't control what's happened, but you control what you're going to do about it. It wasn't fair that Jackie Robinson was up against all these other disadvantages as a player. I think Jackie Robinson was hit by like 60 pitches, for instance, in his major league career. But he still chose to comport himself with self-control and dignity. And most of all, he fucking shoved it in their faces by being one of the greatest baseball players of all time. So I think it's possible to, again, hold two semi-contradictory ideas in your head at the same time, which is that the system has been systematically unfair for generations, and that's created real deficits and disadvantages. And each of us wakes up today in the world, and we're forced to figure out how to make the most of the situation. And I think it's important to also stipulate race and gender are not the only disadvantages that people get in life. Like you were saying, you come from a family of obese people. That was a real obstacle that you not only had to struggle with, but learned patterns and behaviors from that. We're all dealing with shit. And I think at the core of it, we have to decide, are we going to be defined by it, or are we going to transcend it and be made better for what we've experienced?
Yeah, I like what you're saying there in that I was once asked I was doing a talk at Google, and a black guy asked me, hey, Tom, do you think that things are hard? And this is years ago. Do you think that things are harder for me because I'm African American? And I said, almost certainly yes. Like even just look at the math of the situation. So you live in a majority white country, and one of the imperatives of the human mind is to seek out things to categorize as us and them. One of the most obvious and apparent is just physical appearance. And so it's what I call the school of fish phenomena. You always see fish with the same type of fish, right? And they swim in all these schools, and that's just that. So inevitably, you're going to have the sort of soft, like, oh, it is immediately apparent just on like a glance. I don't know you or anything about you. And so I'll sort of automatically categorize you into you're not like me. Now, it doesn't mean that the person automatically has hatred or anything like that. But that just being in a country where you're not the majority is already going to be difficult.
Sure.
So my question to him was, and now what? So you have a system that's working against you, let's just say. Like, I'm perfectly willing to say that either for the historical reasons that you very clearly laid out, it's very clear that things are against you. If what you inherit from your family matters a lot to the success that you will have in your own life, then you're clearly at a deficit, because you don't have to go back very far, like you said, to run into one of your real near ancestors was going to have been completely hobbled. Now, I'll argue that t-shirt to t-shirt in 3 generations is something to consider, in that most families are not passing on financial legacy in the way that people think they do. Now, I do think they pass on a mindset, and the mindset to me becomes far more interesting than the amount of wealth. My parents did not pass on any wealth to me, but they made sure that I got educated. So that's big. So to me, like, making sure people get educated is critically important. But going back to this question he was asked, and I said, yes, for sure, there are things that are working against you, but now what? Now what he can control is he gets to, in a very stoic response, he gets to decide how he reacts to that. He can't control the way the world is. It's too multifactorial, but he can control how he responds. And so to me, like that is a moment of excitement. It's a moment of excitement to me that no matter how much Kobe Bryant said, boos don't block dunks. So I'll say racism doesn't block success, right? You can get so good. Look at Booker T. Washington, who has become, and I don't understand this. I really don't. And maybe there's an argument that I'm just ignorant to, but I think it was Obama that said, like, don't put me in that Booker T. Washington camp of like, pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Yeah. But Booker T. Washington was a fucking slave and ended up building a school that still lives on today. That's fucking amazing. And so if it couldn't stop him, like there just is the human ability to change and grow can reach a level where you are so good at something that people can't stop you even when they want to. Now, I'm talking in a world where you're not getting shot or lynched or like all that shit is real. I'm not trying to diminish any of that. I'm just looking at today. We've gotten, from a legislative standpoint, I am unaware of any racist laws. They may be there, and again, maybe this is ignorance, but like it feels like from a legislative standpoint, we've said, okay, we now have a sort of basin in which to play that is colorblind, possibly even now beginning to spill in the opposite direction. You have been historically hobbled, depending on how much that feeds into your abilities right now today. but you still get to own how you come at the world. And to me, like, that should be exciting. Like, people should be like, okay, cool. It may be harder for me, but it is still possible for me to do rad shit.
I'm fascinated by Booker T. Washington. I have his right here. I have Up From Slavery right here. It's one of my favorite books. He's a hero of mine. But the knock against Booker T. Washington is, and it's an interesting one. So Booker T. Washington, this is early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s. It's sort of post-Reconstruction. He's basically saying, look, he's basically saying, like, look, the world is so racist and so fucked up that the only way that he's basically saying, look, black people have to earn their respect and their rights, right? And so that the knock, if you look back on it, you're sort of going, well, you were accepting a status quo that perhaps legislatively should have never existed, right? He's basically saying, like, look, he's like, black people, we don't need to worry about education, although obviously he did the Tuskegee Institute, but he's saying we need to focus on, like, learning how to farm and learning how to build things, because that's the only way we can prove our worth to society, which I understand was a very pragmatic take. The argument is just sort of like, well, you should have never had to be in that position to begin with, right? And
this is like the most Stoic moment ever. Agreed. And I won't even say, like, maybe it never should have been. It never should have been. It's fucking grotesque. It's one of the gnarliest things to look back on, is like how gross humans can be with the, like, how long slavery lasted in all cultures. It's madness.
So this is the tension of Stoicism. This is one of the knocks, right? So when does your individual acceptance of adversity, difficulty, fucked up status quo become resigning the society's collective agency over that problem? So Epictetus, right? A slave, he accepts the slavery. He does, basically in Rome, you were a slave for 30 years and then you're freed. So he does his 30-year bid and comes out. But even in Epictetus's writing, he never questions the institution of slavery. None of the Stoics really do ever say, like, they sort of go, this is gross, it shouldn't happen. But they never say slavery is wrong, and if we all come together, we can do something about it. So the knock on Stoicism is that it's somehow resigned, that the Stoics, because we focus, like what you're talking about, is the individual's response to a fucked up situation. Hey, here's all these disadvantages. And by the way, I just read a book about someone you would love, a guy named Major Taylor, who was the greatest bicycle racer in American history. He's a black guy in the late 1800s, better than Lance Armstrong, better than Jackie Robinson, better than Jack Johnson, an incredible athlete, worthy of study. We've sort of forgotten about him. But the point is, at what point does just going, this is the fucked up rigged game, I'm going to figure out how to participate it in myself, limit our ability to come together as a society to fix an injustice or a change, right? And so what I try to write a lot about is understanding that that's not actually what Stoicism is about. There were Stoics who were engaged in revolutions in Rome. Cato bands together a bunch of Stoics and tries to resist Julius Caesar. There's a translator of Epictetus who leads a black regiment for the Union cause in the Civil War. Toussaint Louverture, the revolutionary in Haiti who defies Napoleon, is a black reader of Epictetus. But the American founders, Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and Benjamin Franklin and John Adams, it was Stoicism that inspired these guys to come together and say, we can start a new nation. We can change this. And so I think it's important that, like, the tension is, when does an individual resigning themselves to facts out of their control become complicit in the propagation of the status quo, when, if everyone got together and said, collectively we have power and could change it. So that I think is an important tension. And it kind of brings us back to where we began. You can't just say, hey, this police brutality issue is fucked up and it has all these different causes and no one individual can make a difference. That's history proves us wrong. An individual can create change, but an individual has to try to make change and obviously has to bring other people on board with them. So, I think that that's an important thing that I think in this time of cynicism and pessimism that we don't lose sight of.
All right, so I have a direct idea on that. So and this was going back to that guy that had asked me the question at the Google Talk. It's exactly what I said to him, is some people are called to fight the system, and that's there. And I use called specifically, like there's something in them that compels them that is the way in their life, the things that light them up, that give them more energy, that make it worth it for them, that they feel called in that way. And I'm very grateful that they exist. And for anybody that feels called to address the system, amazing. There is another side to that coin, though, and I want people to understand that I very much doubt if you sat down with Booker T. Washington, he's not going to be like, not complicit to this. I look at the problem, the state of the world, and I say, given the things that light me on fire and what I'm capable of doing and how do I think that I can do this is you've got people that are now legally freed, but they don't have a skill set that allows them to control their own lives, to hold dominion over themselves and their family. And by giving them those skills, they can't be resubjugated. And so I could give you a fiery speech about how that is as important, if not more important. In fact, if every single person suddenly became like our man in the concentration camp, how the fuck would you ever enslave them? It's never going to happen. They're never going to go backwards because there's nothing they won't endure. When you come at them personally, like, fuck it. They will just go all the way. There's no point. And going back to the Gulag Archipelago, as he said, every time you turned a blind eye, you didn't say something, you didn't stand up for yourself, you thought, let me just keep my head down. That was the problem. It wasn't just the system of like, sure, this government came into control. It's that nobody said, fuck off. You just snatched Timmy out of his bed in the middle of the fucking night with no explanation. And then you snatched me. But if then Sally's like, you fucking took Tom and Timmy, what the fuck is going on? And then when Sally gets snatched, somebody else speaks up. Suddenly you realize, oh shit, like we actually can't do this. So you've got people that are called to address the system. I'm so grateful they exist. And then you have people that are personal responsibility on that side. And they're like, if you get good enough, people cannot fucking take advantage of you. It's that simple. And if you look at what Jay-Z has done, literally like 20 years ago, maybe more, he realized I have to own the masters to my own music. And so he went on a quest to get it. He ends up getting the masters to his own music. And it's no surprise that he's as freakishly successful as he is because he knows how to think within the system. He doesn't go in and say, oh, I'm going to try to tear down the entire music system. He's not posting tweets of the contract that he has. He just fucking says, oh, okay, cool. To win in the system, I need to own the masters. I'm going to go own the masters. He gets the masters. And to me, it's like, not only does it show other people what you can do, but it puts him in this incredible position of personal power. And my thing is just don't ever leave that chip on the table. If you have an insight into the system, don't leave that chip on the table. Fucking voice it, fight for it, whatever you feel called to do. But don't leave personal responsibility on the table because there's so much power in it.
No, I think it's both. And look, I'm as big a fan as I am of Booker T. Washington, I think Frederick Douglass is one of the sort of great badasses of all of history. This is a guy who beats the shit out of his slave master. He escapes from slavery. He becomes one of the great writers of his time, but ultimately dedicates himself to the eradication of slavery. And so I think this is a really important Stoic idea, which is the purpose of philosophy, the purpose of the work, the purpose of success is not merely to free yourself, right? Like that's ultimately a very empty thing, to just pile up as many trophies or wins or whatever as possible. Jackie Robinson had this, it's actually on his tombstone. He says, a life is meaningless insofar as its impact on other lives. Right? Like the meaning of life is the impact that your life has on other people's lives. And so the Stoics, that idea of justice was about impact, was about helping others. The Epictetus wasn't just using Stoicism to free himself mentally and physically from slavery, but then he becomes a writer and a teacher. And he not only does he propagate the philosophy all over Rome, but Marcus Aurelius is introduced to Stoicism through the writings of Epictetus, just by the way, as Abraham Lincoln's views on slavery are fundamentally changed through his interactions with Frederick Douglass. So like it's not just about freeing yourself, it's about making an impact on the world and freeing other people. And there, of course, in our modern world, many ways to do that, whether it's with writings or videos or it's, creating a nonprofit, or maybe it's creating a tech company that you sell for billions of dollars, and then you use your power or influence in some other. There's lots of ways to do it, but I think it's really important that the purpose of greatness is not for furthering your own self, right?
I'm with you, but let's look at Jackie Robinson, which I think is a great example. And I admittedly only know what was in the movie, so it's entirely possible I just don't understand the realities of it. But in the movie, it's presented that, hey, what I need from you is not somebody that can go out and confront these guys and, shout them down. I need somebody that's not going to react, that's just going to be so good at baseball that it becomes undeniable that you belong here. And of course, he does that, and that opens the door. And so his contribution, at least as I understand it, was through personal greatness, by showing people, by not reacting, by not being violent back or anything like that, by having composure, that he's able to break the back of the system that would have argued they don't belong or whatever, and just showed, if you want the most exciting baseball played by the most incredible people, then you just have to open this up. And that to me is what I'm saying, is there is a flip side to that, the coin of solve the problem, that has become either passé or people are outright hostile towards it, which is go become a badass, like become a badass motherfucker. And I'm not sure if people will get the chills the way that I get the chills with what I'm about to quote, or if they're going to be like, this is fucking stupid. But going back to Jay-Z, he said, I can't help the poor if I'm one of them. I got rich and gave back. To me, that's the win-win. And I thought, like, I get that. Like, that to me is powerful. You're doing something that serves you, which I think is important, but that also serves other people in a larger context. And few people, that I know of in that industry have done a great job of reaching out to other people to help them up. So I don't know. To me, that's super powerful.
I think that's totally right. And I think you can't help other people from a position of powerlessness. At the same time, just achieving power doesn't inherently help other people. I think it's both. And so we have this, again, a tension of obligations to ourselves and our own ambitions and dreams, and then to other people. And if you just pursue one, you're probably going to be lopsided and not as effective as if you tackle it from both sides.
Well said. I hate that this is true, but I have to wrap now. I will just say, my friend, you are one of the most important contemporary writers on the planet. I am grateful that you do what you do. Lives of the Stoics is amazing. We didn't get to cynicism and the school thereof, but for anybody that reads your book, they will learn the story behind all of that. Where can people find you, find the book, all that good stuff?
No, thanks, man. I love talking with you, and it's so much more fun than other podcasts where you just kick around bullshit. So the book is Lives of the Stoics, everywhere books are sold. And then if you want an email of Stoicism every day, which I send out totally for free, you can go to dailystoic.com/email.
Amazing. Brother, I enjoy you as a human being. I think you're incredible.
Thank you.
I cherish every moment we get to spend together. I look forward to sharing space with you again in the future.
You got it, man.
Awesome. Everybody, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care.
He was perfectly built to beat cancer. But what he walked out from that was maybe some twisting of the wire, and that winning itself was now living, and losing.